Welcome to the Canyoneering Karma podcast. Your host, Rich Carlson, is here to take you on a journey of learning and exploration. So grab your gear and a rope and follow along.
Hi, thanks for tuning in. This is the second episode of the Canyoneering Karma podcast. If you were to look at the date of episode 1, you might think I set out to create an annual podcast. Well, that's not the case, but sometimes we make plans and life just gets in the way. My current plan is to release an episode every Tuesday, so I hope you will continue tuning in. The topic of this episode is becoming competent. I like to start with a little story. I had a woman in a class once who told me that she met a partner online through one of the meetup groups or Facebook groups. The guy told her that he had done more than 100 canyons, so she assumed that he was competent and would be a good partner for her as a beginner. On one of their canyoneering trips together, the woman was on rappel, and her hair got stuck in her rappelling device. She assumed her partner would be able to take care of the situation, but he had rigged the rope with a static block and didn't know how to convert it to a lower. So his solution to the problem was to lower a knife to her on a string so she could use it to cut her hair. During the class, she showed me and the other students the bald spot that she was covering up with a weave. I pointed out to her that being experienced doesn't necessarily mean being competent. Another example from back in the early days of the American Canyoneering Association, I had a guy that wanted to skip our level 1 class and go straight to level 2 because he told me that he'd been canyoneering for 15 years. I made him a deal and suggested that he go ahead and take level 1, and if at the end of the class he could look me in the eye and tell me he didn't learn anything of value, I would give him a 100% credit so he could come back and take level 2. In the level 1 class, it turned out he didn't know how to self-rescue, he didn't know how to ascend a rope, and he didn't know how to set up any anchors. I asked him how he could possibly have been canyoneering for 15 years and not know how to do those basic skills, but he told me he always had partners that took care of the anchors and the rigging, and if the rope got stuck, somebody else would ascend the rope. Please understand that I am not meaning to downplay the importance of experience. To become truly competent, you do need experience. But as you're acquiring experience, you also need to be learning. Learning often comes in 4 stages. The first stage is what's known as unconscious incompetence. In other words, we don't even know what we don't know. The second stage is conscious incompetence. At this stage, we recognize that there's things that we don't know that we need to learn. We feel uncomfortable as we begin to realize how little we know. We recognize the need to improve and make a commitment to learn by remembering rules. Related to these first 2 stages is something known as the Dunning Kruger Effect. It's represented as a graph that starts with a peak, referred to as the peak of ignorance, and then it drops into a low point that's referred to as the valley of humility, and then it starts climbing again. At the peak of ignorance, we're at that first stage where we don't even know what we don't know. The valley of humility is when we enter that second stage of learning, that conscious incompetence. We realize there's things that we don't know and we need to learn. Quite often we drop into that valley of humility because something went wrong. You're out doing canyons, nothing's going wrong. You think the only thing you need to know is how to tie some webbing around a tree, how to run your rope through the rappel ring, how to rappel, how to pull the rope at the end, coil your rope, and move on. And then something goes wrong, and you realize you probably need to learn one more thing. As a line on the graph comes up out of the valley of humility, it continues to have peaks and valleys, because we continue to learn and continue to realize that there's always more to learn. The third stage is conscious competence. At this point, we're in the process of learning and acquiring skills. We haven't mastered them yet, but at least we're on the path to learning and becoming competent. We are starting to comprehend the principles behind the systems and techniques we use. Our confidence increases as we continue to learn and improve. The fourth stage is unconscious competence. At this point, skills become second nature, and you can perform tasks without even thinking. This is the stage where you have the ability to start improvising. Staying safe in an adventure sport like canyoneering requires that you become competent. The shortest path to becoming competent starts in the Valley of Humility. But the key really is to spend as little time as possible on the peak of ignorance. When you get into a new activity, remind yourself of that. Accept the fact that you are quite likely incompetent. Skip the unconscious incompetence stage and go straight to the conscious incompetence stage. This is coming from an old man with far less testosterone than he once had. Maybe it seems easier said than done. Maybe even impossible for some of my listeners. But it's good advice. I hope you take it. I have a free tool on my website you can download that may help you. The tool is a Competencies Checklist. It is organized by sections for canyoneering essentials, risk management, gear selection, use and care, knotcraft, forces and friction, anchors and rigging, techniques on rope, and rescue systems, plus slot canyon skills and aquatic skills. Each section lists specific knowledge and skills that you should acquire at each level of your learning progression. The levels are identified as entry level, level 1, technical canyoneering, level 2, advanced canyoneering, and level 3, canyon leadership. These levels are not arbitrary. They relate to the roles we play as part of a team of canyoneers. An entry-level canyoneer is expected to possess sufficient knowledge, skills, and gear so that they are not a liability to a team in canyons, up to and including Class 3. A Level 1 canyoneer is expected to possess sufficient anchor and rigging skills, along with appropriate gear, so they can become a contributing member of a team descending easy to intermediate canyons up to and including Class 3. A Level 2 canyoneer is expected to possess sufficient anchor and rigging skills, along with appropriate gear, so they can become a contributing member of a team descending intermediate to advanced canyons up to and including Class 4. A Level 3 canyoneer is expected to possess sufficient technical and group management skills, along with appropriate gear, to lead a team descending beginner to advanced canyons, including when things don't go completely as planned. It is important to understand that there is no consistent standard for training levels among canyoneering instructors. One instructor might design their courses to follow the Competencies Checklist, while another will include some of the entry-level skills with some of the Level 1 skills in the same 2 or 3 day course. It can be challenging to know if what you learned in one instructor's Level 1 course has prepared you sufficiently for another instructor's Level 2 course. But that is another value of having the Competencies Checklist as a roadmap of sorts. The list of knowledge and skills in the Competencies Checklist is quite comprehensive. In fact, it might be a bit intimidating, and that is one way it can help you avoid hanging out on that peak of ignorance. Being a bit intimidated looking at a long list of things you don't know yet puts you at the second stage of learning right from the start. It's better to be consciously incompetent than unconsciously incompetent. You will likely be acquiring knowledge and skills from a variety of sources, not learning exclusively through formal training. It is also possible for you to be at one stage of learning for some skills and at other stages for other skills. For example, you may have mastered techniques on rope, but remain consciously or even unconsciously incompetent about rescue systems. I mentioned earlier that you can use the Competencies Checklist as a roadmap of sorts to guide you through your learning journey. Do an honest self-assessment of what you already know and what skills you possess, and use the Competencies Checklist to identify gaps. Then set out to fill those gaps. Be patient. It is not enough to simply learn a new skill and have the ability to perform it in a controlled environment, like practicing your rigging systems on the tree in your backyard or practicing your techniques on rope at a local climbing area. Get into some canyons that are within your current skill level. Look for opportunities to practice skills in context, ideally with a competent mentor. It is not enough to simply learn how to do things. You also need to learn to identify when and why each skill and technique is appropriate and when it is not. Canyoneering is an incredible activity that takes us into some of the most beautiful terrain on our planet. The canyons have been there for a very long time, and they will be there for more time to come. They will wait for you to acquire the knowledge and skills you need to explore them safely. Bonus material for this episode is available in the podcast section of my website. Check it out at canyonsandcrags.com.
Thank you for joining us at the Canyoneering Karma podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Until next time, have fun, be safe.